I knew something was about to go nuclear when I walked into the control room and heard Taylor Swift playing instead of the usual hum of cooling systems. That was my first clue. The second was seeing my emergency protocol whiteboard covered in Tiffany's vision board, complete with magazine cutouts of yoga retreats, baby alpacas, and some quote about manifesting digital abundance. My name's Garrett Hoffman. I'm 47, widowed, supporting 2 kids. Rachel's a sophomore at Virginia Tech studying engineering. Josh is a senior in high school planning for the Naval Academy. And I tap my wife's watch exactly 3 times every morning before checking reactor status, a ritual that's kept me sane for the 3 years since Sarah passed from cancer. I don't do office politics. I don't do motivational speeches. I just keep 14 critical infrastructure nodes from going dark and taking half the eastern seaboard with them. For 16 years, I've been the control rod insertion that keeps Iron Bridge systems from achieving critical mass. And for 16 years, I've been invisible until Golden Boy showed up. The Navy taught me that nuclear reactors don't care about your feelings. They follow physics. You respect the protocols, or you get radiation poisoning. It's that simple. Same principle applies to network security. Turns out, systems either run clean or they melt down. There's no middle ground. Back in 2019, when foreign actors were probing our infrastructure like testing reactor shielding for weak spots, I spent 72 hours straight rebuilding our entire defense network from the ground up. No sleep, just coffee and pure stubborn determination. Howard Caldwell, the CEO, found me passed out over my keyboard at 6 a.m. on day 4, diagnostic screen still running. He shook my shoulder and said, "Hoffman, you just saved the company." Then he handed me a contract amendment that I barely read before signing. Emergency authorization clause, equity transfer provisions, all buried in legal terminology I didn't think I'd ever need. That contract was like installing a dead man's switch on a nuclear submarine. You hope you never have to use it, but when the hull starts cracking, you're damn glad it's there. Bryce Caldwell, 32, MBA from Wharton, more trust fund than technical knowledge, son of the CEO, wearer of $500 sneakers, and proud speaker of phrases like optimizing our cyber defense ecosystem. He strutted into headquarters on a Monday morning like he just invented computers, brought his influencer girlfriend, Tiffany Wells, too. She introduced herself with, "I'm really passionate about digital wellness and intuitive leadership," which I'm pretty sure means she's allergic to actual work. The moment Bryce was appointed VP of Digital Operations, I knew my reactor was going critical. The warning signs started immediately. He's bringing fresh energy. She's got a real vision for modern security. Garrett's too analog. I once rebuilt our routing firmware using a Raspberry Pi and 6 hours of Red Bull-fueled focus during a DoD emergency. But yeah, let's trust the woman who thinks RAID is something you spray for bugs. Tiffany started showing up to what she called workflow optimization sessions, which mostly involved her rearranging furniture and asking why we had so many blinking lights. She filmed TikTok videos in the server room, calling it behind the scenes of digital magic. I watched her post a 15-second clip of herself dancing next to a rack of classified defense servers with the caption, "When your office vibes are immaculate, tech life, girl boss." I sent the video to HR with a note about security violations. They sent back a reply saying Tiffany had executive approval for creative content development, and I should embrace new communication paradigms. That's when I started backing up everything. The worst part, the meetings I used to attend got reassigned. I used to be the quiet professional in the corner, competent, reliable, caffeinated. Now, I wasn't even invited. My security clearance mysteriously got under review. My maintenance tickets got reassigned to contractors who didn't know a firewall from a garden fence. One guy called me asking how to reboot the internet because the Wi-Fi in the break room was down. Josh called me one evening while I was working late, stress testing backup protocols. "Dad, you sound tired," he said. "Kids got good instincts. Naval Academy material, for sure. Just some reactor maintenance," I told him, which wasn't entirely a lie. "Hey, about that Academy application already submitted," he said, pride clear in his voice. "Used your recommendation letter about leadership under pressure." That hit me harder than expected. 3 taps on Sarah's watch. She would have been so proud of both kids. Rachel pulling a 3.8 GPA in mechanical engineering. Josh running point on his ROTC unit's cyber defense team. Everything I'd worked for was about keeping their futures secure. College tuition at Virginia Tech runs $32,000 a year. Naval Academy is free if you get in, but the competition's brutal. Rachel's next 2 years would cost me $64,000 money I didn't have if I lost this job. But Tiffany started holding mindful workflow alignment sessions in my control room, burning sage over the emergency backup drives like she was cleansing evil spirits. She posted Instagram stories from inside the facility, showing classified equipment in the background. When I complained, Bryce told me I was resistant to innovation and needed to level up my collaboration skills. That's when I knew they were planning to scram me out of the system entirely. The final warning came when I submitted my quarterly security assessment, a 47-page operational risk analysis with color-coded threat maps, vendor contract timelines, and a red flag section labeled CR. Do not grant unauthorized access to classified systems. I'd spent 3 weeks on that report, documenting every vulnerability, every expired license, every potential point of failure. Bryce replied with a thumbs-up emoji and a Slack message. Thanks, bro. Looks thorough. That was it. 47 pages of critical infrastructure analysis reduced to looks thorough, like dismissing a reactor safety inspection with seems fine. I printed out a copy of that response and taped it to my monitor. Physical evidence of the exact moment competence became irrelevant. By the way, if you've made it this far, maybe consider hitting that subscribe button, not just for me, but for every Navy veteran eating lunch alone in the control room while keeping America's power grid running. It keeps the coffee flowing and these stories coming. I knew the scram order was coming, so I prepared. First, I documented everything. Full network maps, security protocols, emergency procedures. I encrypted backups, flagged expiring contracts, printed hard copies of every vendor agreement, and uploaded my resignation letter to 3 separate secure drives. Not because I wanted to use it, but because I knew someone would force containment breach protocols. Then I did something Bryce would never understand. I created a failsafe, not sabotage that would violate everything I swore to protect, just a protocol. A system that recognized me as the reactor operator. A system that, if misused, would slowly initiate emergency lockdown procedures, degrade functionality, and trigger alert chains to vendors, legal, and eventually the DoD Inspector General. Not out of malice, out of survival instinct. Because Ironbridge didn't just employ me, it ran on my reactor design. And the moment they forgot that, well, you don't pull the control rods and expect the core to stay stable. The failsafe was buried deep in the emergency framework I'd written during that 72-hour lockdown when foreign actors were probing our infrastructure. It was designed as a dead man's switch. If the system detected unauthorized changes without proper authentication protocols, it would begin systematic containment procedures, not to destroy anything, but to protect classified data from incompetent handling. I'd included a specific clause in my original contract during the 2019 cyber attack on the power grid. Howard Caldwell, the founder, had given me emergency authorization to rebuild everything from scratch. In that chaos, he'd signed off on a security provision buried in legal terminology. 0.73% equity transfer per infrastructure node successfully secured and maintained over 36-month continuous cycle, activated upon wrongful termination without cause. Witnessed by general counsel filed with corporate records. 14 nodes times 2.73% equals 38.22% controlling interest. I'd earned it, protected it, maintained it for years. All legal, all documented, all waiting like a backup generator in an underground bunker. The Navy taught me something else: always have an escape route planned, but never abandon ship unless absolutely necessary. Sarah used to laugh at how I'd check emergency exits in restaurants, count fire extinguishers in hotels, always position myself where I could see the room. Navy paranoia, she called it, but that paranoia kept reactor crews alive for decades. By Friday, the whiteboard had a new addition: Tiffany's server room makeover, healing crystals, and mood lighting. I stared at that note so long I nearly developed radiation poisoning. She wanted to replace emergency lighting with something more aesthetically pleasing and add plants to improve the energy flow. Plants. In a climate-controlled server room designed for optimal equipment cooling, I saved my final security report, made a backup, and wrote one sentence at the bottom. If I'm not here Monday, initiate Protocol Omega. Protocol Omega was my nuclear option, not destructive but absolute. Complete system lockdown with transfer of all administrative control to original architect credentials. I designed it during the 2019 crisis when we thought the attack might succeed. If the facility was compromised, Protocol Omega would seal everything behind military-grade encryption until proper authority could be restored. I didn't think I'd need it. I was wrong. Monday morning started normal. Coffee in Sarah's old mug. World's best dad in faded letters. 3 taps on her watch. Check the overnight logs. System status nominal. Cooling circulation optimal. No anomalies detected. Everything running clean. Rachel texted me at 10:30. Dad, got my midterm grades, Dean's List again. That girl was going to make a hell of an engineer. Probably end up designing the next generation of nuclear power plants or maybe spacecraft propulsion systems. Sarah always said Rachel got my analytical mind but with better people skills. Josh sent a photo from his ROTC training exercise, him in full gear. Serious expression, rifle at ready. Kid looked like a natural leader. The Naval Academy would be lucky to get him. His application was strong, but competition was brutal. 150 applicants for every slot. If he didn't make it, Plan B was Virginia Military Institute. Good school, but the Navy was his dream. Everything my kids achieved, everything they'd become, depended on keeping this job. My salary covered the house payment, Rachel's tuition, Josh's college fund, and the medical bills we were still paying from Sarah's treatment. Cancer doesn't just take your wife, it takes your financial stability for years afterward. Insurance covered most costs, but most still leaves you with $60,000 in debt. At 11:15, I was deep in a maintenance ticket about cooling system irregularities, tracking potential thermal runaway, like monitoring reactor temperature, when I got the ping. "Hey Garrett, can you swing by my office for a quick sync?" That smiley face was the corporate equivalent of incoming missile strike. I stared at the message. Bryce had never called it a sync before. That was new corporate speak, probably learned from some leadership podcast. I considered triggering a security emergency, fake system alert that would require my immediate attention, but decided against it. Time to face the music. 3 taps on Sarah's watch. Deep breath. I saved my work, locked my workstation, and headed toward the glass office Bryce called his innovation hub. The rest of us called it the containment vessel. Walking down that hallway felt like approaching a reactor that had already achieved criticality. Every step brought me closer to the point of no return. But Navy training kicked in when you're dealing with nuclear material. Panic kills. You follow procedures, trust your training, and execute the plan. The plan was simple: maintain professionalism, document everything, and if they wanted to remove me from the control room, make sure they understood exactly what they were giving up. He didn't look up when I walked in, just kept tapping his phone, smirking. Tiffany was perched on the conference table like a discount Bond villain, sipping something green from a mason jar. She gave me a little wave and said, "Hey there, Garrett, love the flannel." I hadn't spoken more than 3 words to her since she'd optimized our emergency documentation by deleting everything and replacing it with PowerPoint slides full of stock photos. "Take a seat," Bryce said, gesturing vaguely without making eye contact. I didn't. He finally looked up, grinning like someone who just discovered his trust fund had interest. So after a lot of strategic thinking and forward-looking analysis, he began. The buzzwords were oozing out of him. "We've decided to restructure operations. Tiffany's got a real vision for this stuff, and we think her approach aligns more with where Ironbridge is heading. Your methods are, well, legacy." Legacy. Like my experience came with rust and outdated firmware. I kept my voice flat. "She's not cleared for basic access." Tiffany blinked. "Clearance? That's like a rewards program, right?" Bryce laughed. "It's not really about paperwork anymore, Garrett. It's about energy, and her energy is exactly what we need." Energy? I'd spent 16 years maintaining systems that could black out half the East Coast, and they wanted to replace me with energy. "We've already brought in a consultant to handle the technical transition," Bryce continued. "Someone who understands modern security paradigms. Fresh perspective, fresh perspective. Translation: someone cheaper who wouldn't ask inconvenient questions about protocol violations." For a second, I didn't say anything. The temperature in the room felt like it dropped 10 degrees, like coolant circulation failure. I'd predicted this, prepared for it, but hearing him say it so casually, like I was obsolete equipment he was decommissioning, made me tap Sarah's watch once, hard. "Anyway, today's your last day, effective immediately. No hard feelings, right? No hard feelings." I looked at Tiffany. She was scrolling through her phone, probably planning her next digital wellness in the workplace TikTok. I turned back to Bryce. "You have no idea what you've just initiated," I said quietly. He smiled wider, clearly thinking I was bluffing. "Come on, Garrett, don't make this awkward." I reached into my back pocket, pulled out my badge, and laid it on his desk like placing a control rod. Gentle, no drama, no raised voice. 45 minutes, I said. He frowned. "What? You have 45 minutes before everything goes dark? Tell your father I said good luck," Tiffany snorted. "Wait, is that like metaphorical? I didn't answer?" I just turned and walked out. The office felt different. Not heavy or lighter, like pressure relief valve activation. HR tried to intercept me on the way out. Some kid offered me a packet labeled transition resources. I took it without breaking stride and dropped it in the trash by the elevator. Funny how they always had exit paperwork ready, but never seemed to plan for the technical knowledge walking out the door. Back at my workstation, I unplugged my personal tablet, slipped it into my bag. I didn't delete anything because nothing needed deleting. Every warning I'd given them was documented. Every alert I'd configured was armed. Every fuse was lit. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were firing the guy who designed their security system because he was too focused on security, like relieving a nuclear reactor operator because he cared too much about avoiding meltdowns. I pulled up my terminal one last time, typed 4 characters, my initiation code for Protocol Omega. The system asked for confirmation. wailing. This action will initiate emergency lockdown procedures. Continue. YN I typed Y. Profocal Mega. Activated. Countdown. 44T59 somewhere deep in the network infrastructure, the system had just logged its first unauthorized change under Tiffany's new credentials. She'd been granted administrative access that morning, part of Bryce's modernization initiative. The countdown had begun. By the time I hit the lobby, I was already getting texts. One from Lisa in payroll, can't access anything. Did you change permissions? One from our Baltimore data center, vendor contract showing as voided. What's happening? Then a Slack from Bryce himself. Weird error on admin dashboard. You still around? I turned off notifications. In the parking lot, I climbed into my F-150, exhaled, and finally let the radiation levels spike. Not from fear, from controlled nuclear reaction. They thought they were replacing me with crystals and good vibes. They forgot I built the reactor they were standing on, and I'd just removed the control rods. Eddie, the security guard, barely glanced up as I walked out. We'd shared enough late-night vending machine battles and microwave territory wars that words weren't necessary. He just nodded, one veteran to another. Stay safe, brother, he said quietly. Always do, I replied. Eddie understood. 20 years Army Corps of Engineers before taking the security job. We'd never talked about service much, but you recognized the signs, the way someone checks exits, the posture, the quiet competence. He knew what was coming before anyone else did. No alarms, no badge confiscation ceremony, no awkward goodbye potluck, just me walking out calm and quiet, like I hadn't just activated the first domino in a chain reaction that would achieve critical mass in exactly 43 minutes. I didn't drive away immediately. Just stood there breathing Virginia air, the kind of deep breath that lives between relief and anticipation. I was technically unemployed, but functionally free, and the reactor was just reaching operating temperature. The first cascade failure showed up exactly 47 minutes later. Portland Data Center reported authentication errors. Tiffany, in her wisdom, had silenced those alerts earlier because they were disrupting her creative flow. According to a screenshot that mysteriously appeared in my Signal inbox, do we need these red flashing things? They're really harsh. By sunset, 6 dashboards were showing scrambled data. One ticketing system froze on a request for printer paper. Engineers started communicating via email like it was 2003. Howard Caldwell touched down at Reagan National just after 3 a.m., dragging 38 hours of jet lag. A briefcase full of classified contracts, and enough espresso to power a small generator. He bypassed the usual executive escort, told his driver to kill the music, and stormed through headquarters like a man walking into his own meltdown. Upstairs, he bypassed the welcome committee Bryce had arranged and locked himself in his corner office with his personal laptop, the one he used to access the shadow dashboard showing real-time diagnostics of Ironbridge's entire digital backbone. The laptop connected and froze. 14 red dots blinked at him from 14 sectors, each one marking critical infrastructure. Normally green, they pulsed like emergency beacons. He clicked New York, failover backup expired, access rights invalid. Click Denver, core control system inaccessible, contact system architect. Click Norfolk, license expired, security audit pending. He double-clicked the master override interface, the nuclear option meant to restore all systems in case of national emergency. It opened with a flicker, then displayed a single message in white text on black background. System designed by G. Hoffman. Revocable upon misuse. Howard didn't scream, didn't throw the laptop, just closed it with enough force to make the intern down the hall jump. Then came the words that froze the entire floor. Where is he? The email came at 3:17 a.m. No subject, no signature, just you're needed. 9 a.m. boardroom. I didn't reply, didn't need to. I knew what those red dots meant. Knew what the logs were screaming. Knew that the moment the founder saw his empire flickering like a failing reactor, he'd reach for the only person who understood the control systems. I showed up at 8:58 a.m., no suit, no power tie, just boots, jeans, and a flannel shirt that still had yesterday's coffee stain. Hair finger-combed, face set like reactor shielding. I walked past the receptionist who stared like she was seeing a ghost. Past Eddie at security, who gave me a slow, respectful nod. Elevator up, same floor I'd been escorted from days before, badge stripped like a criminal. Now nobody stopped me. The boardroom was full when I entered. Long table, nervous faces, coffee clutched like lifelines. Howard stood at the head, arms crossed, jaw clenched tight enough to crack concrete. And there was Bryce, sitting 3 seats down, pale and jittery, dressed like a man who thought his hoodie and charm could still save him. Tiffany wasn't there. Rumor was she'd locked herself in a supply closet after accidentally triggering the building's fire suppression system. Bryce opened his mouth. Garrett, look, I think we should. Howard cut him off without looking. Sit down, Bryce. Don't speak. The room went sub-zero. I stepped to the head of the table, opposite the founder. No dramatics, no speeches. I pulled my tablet from my bag, the same outdated device they'd all dismissed. Opened a terminal window, entered 4 characters, my original access code on the wall display behind me. 14 red dots blinked once, then turned green. One by one, like emergency lighting coming back online after total system failure. Silence, except for Howard exhaling like pressure relief. He sank into the nearest chair, shoulders suddenly carrying decades. You never sabotaged it, he said, almost to himself. No, sir, I replied. I just removed myself from the control loop. He nodded slowly. And you waited. I shrugged. Emergency protocols run their course. Then came the moment Howard turned toward his son. Not angry, not loud, just done. You're not VP anymore, but Dad, you're done. He said it like initiating emergency shutdown. Final command, no override possible. Bryce slumped like someone had cut his power supply. I didn't smile, didn't gloat. Just tapped the tablet once more and locked the screen. Everything's stable, I said, but I recommend auditing vendor contracts. Your consultant invalidated half of them trying to optimize the interface with emoji stickers. Howard rubbed his temples. Sweet merciful. Someone muttered. She thought AWS was a clothing brand. Nobody laughed. I stood up. Anything else, sir? Howard didn't answer immediately. Just looked at me like a man watching the last functional component of his company consider walking away again. Finally, stay. We'll restructure everything around you. Officially, permanently, I reached into my bag one final time, not the tablet, just a single sheet of paper, crisp and official. I slid it across the polished table. Howard glanced down, squinting, his brow furrowed, as he read the fine print. This is your original contract, he said slowly. Addendum 12, I replied. From the 2019 incident, emergency authorization clause. 0.73% equity transfer per infrastructure node successfully secured and maintained over 36-month continuous cycle, activated upon wrongful termination without cause. His eyes widened as he did the math. 14 nodes times 2.73%, 38.22% controlling interest. I finished. All documented, all legal, all mine. The room went silent except for Bryce making a strangled sound like cooling system failure. I looked at him one final time. Your girlfriend's sweet? She'd do great in retail. Howard stared at the contract like it was written in reactor specifications, then looked up at me with something approaching reverence. Mr. Hoffman, he said quietly. Welcome to the executive board. I picked up my tablet, headed for the door. No escort needed this time. Outside, Tiffany stood by her white Tesla, mascara running like a broken coolant leak. Bryce paced beside her, shouting into his phone, just get me someone who knows what they're doing. He can't just own everything, but I could, and I did. A company SUV pulled up, mine now. I slid on my sunglasses and got in. 6 months later, Rachel graduated summa cum laude from Virginia Tech. Josh received his appointment to the Naval Academy. The house was paid off. Sarah's medical debt cleared. Ironbridge stock hit an all-time high after we landed 3 new defense contracts. Bryce works at a startup now, something about disrupting the pet grooming industry. Last I heard, they're pre-revenue and burning through investor capital. Tiffany has a wellness podcast. Neither of them lasted long in the defense sector after their security clearances got permanently revoked. As for me, I show up every morning, check the reactor status, and make sure America's critical infrastructure stays online. Same job, different title. Chief Technology Officer has a nice ring to it. Listen, if you've made it this far, maybe you recognize something in this story. Maybe you've spent decades perfecting your craft while watching less qualified people get promoted above you. Maybe you've been told your experience is legacy or your methods are outdated. Maybe you're 47 or 52 or 58 and wondering if anyone values what you've built anymore. Here's what I learned: competence doesn't expire. The systems you understand, the problems you've solved, the crises you've managed, that knowledge doesn't become obsolete just because someone younger has a different vocabulary for it. Document everything, know your worth, and never let them forget who keeps the lights on. Subscribe if this resonates. Critical mass achieved.